programming technique to anchor that thought in your mind.
Wow. It's interesting because our agent IPA says that newspeak green means death. And I
but there's
know.
other. Okay, that's just one of the many interpretations, and you have to be careful because I speak green, for instance, with many of my friends when I know that the powers that be are monitoring our phones.
Okay.
And by speaking green or speaking the language of the birds, as it's called, one can communicate in clear and otherwise unencumbered English about rather common subjects, and at the same time be speaking about many levels that are probably many of them are entirely hidden to casual observers. So, for instance, green speak in our terminology could include that. Would also include any time that I use green in particular references as my green friends, for instance, would indicate, a person that I knew who was in the armed services, and so on and so on. There's all these various different layers of metaphor going on. So I wouldn't assume that there's only a single interpretation to it. But that is true. Powers that be are using green as the death symbol at this point.
And so they are using green as the death symbol.
Right,
That was
and it has something to do, curiously, with the vibrational gas chromatograph color for oxygen is green, and the color green that they've chosen is a combination of the frequencies of hydrogen and oxygen. So there's real deep meaning in there. What that might be going to is speculation, but it is observable.
Now, one of the things that one of the conclusions that our agent IPA came up with, and maybe he got it from you, is that we all need to have a victory garden. And it's the people with victory gardens who are going to survive this.
I agree.
You do
on
agree?
many different levels, because, especially in the United States, because as the dollar dies, an additional 2 billion people are going to be plunged into poverty, many of them here in the United States. And North America, let me put it that way, in England. And it will be the ability to grow your own food independent of whatever else goes on that will provide that anchor both mentally and physically and health-wise that will be very key with a degrading health system. Plus, there's the whole starvation issue. People think they can't grow their own food and they starve and suffer. We've seen examples of that at huge levels in the recent history, for instance, when after the destruction of the French agriculture in World War II, we gifted them tons of sacks of corn, and they didn't see it as food and so didn't eat it and prolonged their suffering for some more months than would have been otherwise if we just shipped them wheat. So it's a question of mental attitude as well.
Right. So there's lots of things in our own backyard that we could probably eat, such as snails.
Well, I wouldn't even go that far. I'm a vegetarian, and there's great books out there how to feed yourself on free food.
Yes.
It comes from the Depression and so forth, but, I have a lineage that goes back to Walker's Hollow in Missouri, and my relatives there are great for gleaning. You're going down the road and you see watercress growing in the side of the ditch, and so you grab watercress to go along. You drive a little further, you see wild rhubarb, et cetera, et cetera. There's thousands of plants that we don't habitually eat because we've been trained by the mass agriculture not to, but they're some of the most healthy plants around, and if anybody wants a real education in how to effectively eat in hard times, we need only look at Greece and Crete. When the Nazis took over Greece in World War II, at the end of World War II, they shipped all of the produce and all of their livestock, everything they could get, north into Germany, and effectively bankrupted Greece, and about 25% of their population died that first year, mainly from the effects of malnutrition and starvation, as well as the collapse of their healthcare system. Again, something we're facing here. The ones that remained went back to a traditional Greek diet of all these wild gathered herbs, which, of course, herbs are good for you. And they survived much better than other marginally well-fed populations in Italy and some of the other areas during that same period of time. So true, Greece lost about a quarter of its population, but 75% that survived had a much better, healthier, longer life due to being forced to start looking at non-traditional food sources.
Wow, isn't that amazing? So I think all of us need to go out and buy books on what we can harvest in the vacant field across from our houses.
Yeah, there's dozens of kinds of weeds that we routinely apply Roundup to that are not only edible, they're extremely nutritious and provide all kinds of vitamins and so forth. Purslane is just right off the top of my head. But there's all kinds of things you can eat. I, for instance, I'm really into the systems of it all, right? So I've got a system of worms that consume my garbage to produce fertilizer and for me to help grow my garden. I've got the garden system, I've got the pollinators in the forms of the bees, but I'm also prepared to have to deal with even further hardship, which is gleaning products around here. And I'm well prepared to go into the forest and hunt for mushrooms at the appropriate time of the year, get into a boat and go to some of the areas around here that have berries on the islands and so forth. So it can be done, and it can be an effective way of life. It will be forced on us, so as you're quite correct, probably ought to get a book on it now and start studying up on it.
Now, you have a greenhouse that you built. Did you build it yourself, or did you follow someone's plans? Or?
No, I got online. I'm a great fan of Buckminster Fuller. Absolute genius, perhaps one of the foremost geniuses on the planet ever. And in my way of thinking, he absolutely tops Einstein and all these other fellows. Anyway, he discovered that the easiest, most efficient way to cover the largest span of distance was with a geodesic dome. And so I just got online, found the math, went on out and bought a bunch of steel, started cutting and hammering and drilling that steel and painting it for some months, driving my wife and everybody crazy as I was out there with this 10-pound mallet flattening out the ends of the steel bar and then bending them into the appropriate angles, and then just assembled it and got some woven poly from some guys in Galveston. Woven poly is an interesting product because what they do is they take polyvinyl chloride and cut it into strips, and then they weave it together and then fuse it back into a sheet. So it actually reduces ultraviolet by almost 20%, and effective light reduction is only about 10%. So it's great for growing plants anything north of, say, 35 latitude, where you have to deal with the issues of ultraviolet in your plant in the garden.
Now, Chris, hold on. We've got the break coming, and we'll come right back to the way that you constructed your greenhouse. You're listening to Rumor Mill News Radio on the Micro Effect Broadcast Network. I'm talking with Clif High, and we're getting into his greenhouse. We'll be right back. You're listening to Rumor Mill News Radio. We're talking with Clif High from Half Past Human, and Clif has a greenhouse. It's a geodesic dome. It looks huge, Clif. I've seen the pictures, and you were just talking about the fabric that you made, and you kind of went over that really fast, but you said it's a fabric that keeps out most of the ultraviolet light.
Reduces it by about 20%, yeah.
By about 20%. That's incredible. I looked at the thermometer in your greenhouse. It was reading 86 degrees.
That's pretty much the standard temperature in there for most of the day, yeah.
Now, you're in Washington. When it's snowing outside, it's 86 degrees in your greenhouse?
Oh, if I've got snow, and sun, I can get in a situation where I have to actually shed heat. It can get much hotter than that.
Oh, my gosh. That's incredible. So anyone that builds one of these, we can build it anywhere from Alaska to Florida and probably get the same results. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's actually a real reason to build it in some of the areas of the Southwest because, of course, it holds in moisture.
Right.
So in other areas, you want to hold in heat, but in areas of drought, you control the amount of moisture that escapes from the plants.
Now, I know you've got winds in Washington. How does it hold up to winds?
Well, I've been hit really hard. At the same year that we had a number of trees fall and sustain lots of damage here, the whole dome was picked up by a 55-mile-an-hour wind. I didn't even have it anchored at that point, and it shifted about 3 feet. So its current position is where the wind put it, but it only took it 3 feet and didn't damage it. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, they're really good structures. It's relatively cheap to build to cover that amount of area. It's about 33 feet in diameter. I've got about I want to say close to 17 feet in height in the interior. And you can make them a lot nicer than mine. I just kind of cobbled it together, and then it was moved by the wind, and then we had all kinds of storm damage around it, and so it's been repaired a couple of times. But even when it collapsed at one point from several thousand pounds of snow falling from the top of a 180-foot fir, it was only 6 pieces that bent, and they were easily fixed over the course of about a day and a half.
Oh, my gosh, so it is pretty good. I wonder if it would survive a tornado direct hit. I doubt that.
Oh, I doubt that. But well anchored, it has a huge load capacity for active and dynamic forces on it. you know, you can make them stronger than mine using tubular steel. I just chose a cheaper form because I don't have a whole lot of money, so I just got square tubing, which at the time was less than $1 a foot, so it was easy to put together. The whole thing cost me like $800.
Wow. Okay, so what is this fabric again?
It's a woven poly. You can get it out of a place in Galveston. That's where I bought it because they recently, I built this shortly after the Katrina, and they suffered so much damage down there, I deliberately tried to purchase some materials from that region. But it's made all over. And just look for woven poly in any of the search engines, and it's a polyvinyl fabric that they cut into strips and then fuse back into big sheets. Really tough, really tough. It must have 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 pounds per square inch tearing strength. You can cut it, but you can't rip it by pulling it.
Okay, that sounds quite good. So I hope everybody wrote that down. Woven poly vinyl fabric for our greenhouses, because I really am encouraging all of my readers and listeners to do their victory garden. And as I said, I live here in California, and if I just have a thin plastic, but if I cover my my garden with this thin plastic, I can still be producing all the way into January and February, just when it's time for me to start seeding my garden for the next year.
Yeah, we've gone to this 4-season harvest approach with cold frames for cold weather crops and adjusting what we're growing. And I should point out that if people wanted to go to halfpasthuman.com, I have pictures on a link at the bottom to the grow dome, and you can see some of the pictures of the interior. I've got tomatoes in there now that are about 1.5 feet taller than I can reach.
That is incredible. I see your chair in there. Do you go in for saunas or sunbathing or what?
No, just in case I have visitors that want to sit while we're working, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
But indeed, that the issue of the vitamin D and the sunbathing, it is pertinent because I can do that with the ultraviolet reduced, but you can't around here anymore for, I want to say, the last 5 years anyway, but for sure 5, maybe even longer. You can't really go out and expect to get vitamin D exposure without getting burned. The actinic rays of the sun at the angle of where I'm at 47 degrees latitude in Olympia, Washington. And so we get a burning ray much faster than we get a tanning or a vitamin D producing ray. And
so you would get vitamin D from sitting in your
correct. And that is a thought, especially with the issue of the viruses and so on.
Yes, vitamin D is so very important these days. I have upped my dose to about 5,000 a day.
That's what I'm trying to maintain too.
Yeah, and I think that is about the correct one to maintain.
You can take up to 40,000 a day if you're in dire straits, but you just can't keep it up for long. It's a fat-soluble vitamin, and so it builds up in the system.
Now, when you say you're in dire straits, what would you be taking vitamin D for if you were in dire straits? You mean
if for instance, there was a viral outbreak and you got a form of the flu, and you weren't sure as to what form of the flu it was, you were feeling anxious, and you didn't want to go to the healthcare system if it existed and or it didn't exist, then one could up their vitamin D intake for a very short period of time, and I personally wouldn't do it longer than a day because vitamin D has a tendency to kick up the immune system. However, there's other approaches to that. Herbalists would suggest that another effective way to do it would be through reishi mushroom extract or taking what's known as I think it's L-carnitine, a left-handed molecule called carnitine, which is one of the hormones that kick the immune system up.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's kind of one of those things where it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another, because supposedly the swine flu kills you by hyperactivating your immune system. So you got to be careful in doing that, where vitamin D would provide the support without necessarily